Wow, that is a lot of candidates up on that wall for Chicago mayor. Or Chicago, as I was taught to say before I moved that. So today's election day, Chicago mayoral primary, a hotly contested race for the mayor. Incumbent Lori Lightfoot is fighting for her political survival against 8 challengers. Lightfoot defied expectations 4 years ago, becoming the first black woman and first openly gay person to win the race for mayor in Chicago. Let's bring in now CNN's senior political commentator, host of The Axe Files, and longtime Chicagoan, David Axelrod. It's actually where we met, 2003.
It is indeed, yes.
Cute.
Yeah. Hey, guys.
We're just old. Good morning. Hey, what's the weather like there? Oh, you're in Pennsylvania. So, but
I'm in Pennsylvania, but it's nice in Chicago. I'm told it's nice in Chicago today. Good voting weather. I hope everybody takes advantage of it.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm asking, because that means usually better weather means bigger turnout. So it looks like it could be a runoff in April. What do you make of Lori Lightfoot's chances of being one of the top 2 contenders in advance, to advance, I should say, to that runoff?
Well, that is the big question of the day, Don. Seems pretty clear that one of her opponents, Paul Vallas, will finish first in the runoff in this primary, and he will move on to the runoff. And the big question is who will join him in that runoff. And it's not certain that the incumbent mayor of the city, Lori Lightfoot, will be one of those 2. She's in a very pitched battle with a couple of other candidates, Brandon Johnson, who is a county commissioner backed by the local teachers union, and Congressman Chuy Garcia, who ran last time. One of those 3 is likely to be in the runoff. It may not be the mayor, and we'll have to wait and see. And here's the hitch. We may not know for weeks, because this could be very, very close for second place. If it is, they may have to wait for all the write-in ballots, I should say, to arrive. There's a March 14th deadline for that if it's posted by Election Day. So we'll see. There also could be a recount for that second spot. So April 4th is the general. Half that time may be spent figuring out who the candidates are going to be.
Yeah, there's a real chance of her being shut out. We'll see what happens as we track that. David, while we have you here, also Governor Ron DeSantis' new book comes out today. Often that is what we see candidates do before they declare they're actually a candidate for president. But Jeff Zeleny was highlighting something that I thought was really interesting from it. Trump, always talks about his endorsement of DeSantis, saying that's what helped boost him. And DeSantis writes in his book, "I don't think Republican primary voters are sheep who simply follow an endorsement from a politician they like without any individual analysis," really seeming to downplay a particular endorsement that he got. What'd you make of that?
Well, I think he's rewriting history a little bit. People in Florida, I think, remember how instrumental the Trump endorsement was at the time for DeSantis. Trump's not wrong about that. And we've seen examples around the country in Republican primaries where Trump's endorsement has been meaningful. So, I think DeSantis, he wants to rewrite his origin story here in Florida politics and national politics. But I'll tell you guys, what's amazing to me is the brazenness with which this guy is running his non-campaign campaign. He just was, he's coming to Chicago, or he just was in Chicago talking to the Fraternal Order of Police there. He's making a national tour around the issue of law enforcement under the guise of trying to attract police to come down to Florida. He's got this book tour. What's the subtitle of his book? Florida's Blueprint for America's Revival. This is about as subtle as a screen door on a submarine. It's pretty clear what's going on here, but he says he's not going to announce until June.
So you're saying he's not running? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, right. What's interesting is he's in a position where he's not a candidate, so there's certain legal requirements that he doesn't have to abide by until he's a candidate. But he's also not as much of a target right now because he's not an active candidate. And yes, he's clearly actively campaigning. And it'll be interesting to see how long people take a hands-off posture toward him in this race.
Part of that campaigning that I find so campaigning so fascinating is the culture war element. But as it vis-a-vis Disney, it really collides with the role of government and what the Republican Party stands for, big government or limited government. I mean, yesterday when he signed that bill, David, that gives him control over the land that Disney is on in Florida, and he gets to name all his own board members now. This is what he said. Today, the corporate kingdom finally comes to an end. There's a new sheriff in town. Accountability will be the order of the day. I'm just so struck by that remarked change in philosophy in terms of the role of government and corporations.
No, Poppy, you're so right. You know, Ron DeSantis, when he began in politics and he wrote a book around these principles, was a small government libertarian. Now he's a kind of right-wing authoritarian in the sense that, you know, if you disagree with him as a corporation, he's going to come after you with the power of the state. And that's going to create a lot of debate within the Republican Party, I think. But he is reveling in the culture war elements of this, as you say. That is he believes that's his ticket to getting some of those Trump voters. I always say, you know, the hope of his supporters is that he'll be the kind of transition drug for Trump supporters who want to kick the habit of Trump. He gives you the same culture war high, but may not be as dangerous to your political health. And but he certainly isn't the libertarian that he purported to be. This book is called The Courage to Be Free. But if you're a woman who needs an abortion in Florida, if you're you know, a corporation who expresses itself on a public issue, you know, if you're the parent of you know, if you were gay parents in Florida. I mean, there are a whole range of people who don't feel as free in Florida because of the kind of politics that he's practicing.
David Axelrod, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thanks,
Great
David.
to see you guys.